Want a podcast? Kia ora, I'm Maxine, podcast producer, audio nerd, and founder of Maxine London Creative. Let's explore what it takes to start and maintain a successful podcast. I'll chat with industry experts, podcast hosts, and fellow audio nerds on everything about the wonderful world of podcasting. We'll talk techniques, trends, and top tips to get you started on your podcast journey. Whether you're a podcast newbie or you've been here a while, welcome. Want a podcast? Today I'm chatting with Abbey Harrison, host of Why Do You Parent Like That? Why Do You Parent Like That is a parenting podcast with one set of questions. The idea is that there are a million different ways to parent, so each guest will bring their own unique perspectives, experiences, and feelings to the table. Abbey is a social worker with a postgraduate diploma in counselling, currently on parental leave from her job in maternity and women's health. What Abbey has been able to achieve with her podcast in such a short period of time is inspiring. She's been picked up by iHeartRadio. She's had multiple sponsors, she's featured some amazing guests, and she's built a really solid and highly engaged audience. And today we're here to chat about how she did it. We'll discuss her podcast journey, why she started, what she's learned, and what she hopes for the future of her podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Abbey.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. It's very strange being on the other side of an interview. I'm like, hang on, I'm meant to be doing an introduction, like just sitting here like, oh, I guess this is what my guests feel like when I'm introing them.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's also really nice to actually meet each other. Like we've been talking on Instagram a little bit, but now we're like really face to face.
I know. It's funny. It doesn't feel like this is our first time meeting because I feel like we've talked a lot. So
yeah,
it's funny. It's been a lot like that and sort of making connections through the podcast. It's often by the time you get to talk to a guest, you feel like you've already talked to them a lot before because you've had so much back and forth with them.
Yeah.
So suddenly when you're seeing them, you're like, I feel like I already know you, but this is technically our first time talking. It's very strange.
Yeah, I totally get that. So what inspired you to start Why Do You Parent Like That?
Well, I have been thinking about it for a long time. I love podcasts. First and foremost, I've been listening to podcasts for about 15 years. First listened to the Ricky Gervais podcast, which is not my cup of tea now, but at the time, Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant and Carl Pilkington were sort of like my go-to podcast. And then as I became a parent, I obviously sort of naturally leant towards parent-focused podcasts and found that there was quite a lack of them in New Zealand. And I think with parenting, as much as we can pull from the UK and we can pull from Australia, there is a lot of like from country to country, the cultural differences are quite big just in the way that systems work and in the way like antenatal education works and all those sorts of things. And so I sort of felt like that itch wasn't being scratched of finding stories that were relatable to me. And while some things could be transferred from other countries and advice was good and there were lots of great podcasts out there, I sort of was still looking for a New Zealand-based parenting podcast. And I was searching I wanted to hear someone answering specific questions. And so I was Googling for these questions, like parenting style plus New Zealand plus podcast, and nothing was popping up. And so I got to maternity leave with Max and was like, oh, I guess I'll just give it a crack and see what happens. And yeah, it sort of took off, which was exciting.
Yeah, that's so cool. I feel like a lot of the time, some of the best podcasts come from finding those real gaps and like knowing there's a real lack here and this is something that I'm looking for and it's not here. So, I'm just going to do it myself.
Yeah, totally. And I've always been like an extrovert and always found myself leaning towards making things, and I'm not afraid of like being on camera, and being a social worker, I'm really used to interviewing people as well. So it didn't feel like it wasn't something I could achieve. There was a bit of imposter syndrome for sure, but yeah, I was kind of like, why am I still looking for it or waiting? I was even messaging other people, like Steph Monks. I messaged her and was like, you should make this podcast. And she was like, oh, I just don't really have time for a podcast. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. So yeah.
Love that. So once you decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to just start my own podcast. What were like your first steps that you took to creating it and taking it live?
I started Googling cheap podcast microphones because I am on maternity leave. So the money is tight. I had to do it cheap and found like a little Yeti Nano, the classic everyone's first podcast mic, which I'm still on now and it's treating me okay. And then started looking for names, like reached out to a few friends that I have in the social media space and started sort of workshopping names with them and told them what the plan, like the idea was, and came up with the questions and sort of said, what do you think? What could I name it? And originally it was going to be called Made from Scratch. That was the first name for it. But everyone was like, that's quite Nara Smith adjacent. And if you don't know who Nara Smith is, she's a very different person to me. She's, not everyone's cup of tea, but certainly not like someone that I see myself aligning with at all. So that was sort of, once I sort of got over the Made from Scratch idea, I was like talking to my friend Cassidy Skelton, and she said, why don't you just say, why do you parent like that? Because that's essentially what you're asking people. And I really liked that format because it lent itself to so many other things. So like my Substack is, why do you reflect like that? I've got a mini series coming out called Why Do You Heal Like That? Like it's really lent itself to a lot of sort of different ways that still had that really consistent branding. So I really liked that idea. So once I had the name, I found it really easy to do the branding, and I literally just bought a Canva Pro account. Like it's not anything fancy, but I'm very lucky that a few of my close friends are graphic designers, so they could kind of give me some guidance along the way, but it was very much me and a Canva account figuring it out. But from the idea of deciding to do it to launching the Instagram was a week. So I just decided I was going to do it and did it. Didn't give myself time to back out of it. And I think that was the key. I didn't give myself time to talk myself out of it because I'd thought about it a lot and had always talked myself out of it. But this time I just did it. So from there, it was very easy to source. Well, easy. I was lucky with the connections that I already had in terms of like, I already knew Sonia, the baby namer. I already knew Sophie Moskowitz from Imperfect Parents. I already knew Renata from Rome. I was just really lucky with the people that I had in the space already. So those first 5 guests felt very easy to fill. And because they were quite prominent guests in this space, it was easy to get sponsorship as well. I was just quite lucky with the connections I already had. But yeah, that was basically all I did. And I Googled like easiest podcast recording software and Riverside popped up and I was like, great, okay, I'll do that one.
What did you find surprisingly easy or surprisingly hard about starting?
I was very lucky with how things fell into place. I'm a big believer in like the universe, and you just kind of like, if you're meant to be on the right track, there's not too many roadblocks, and everything felt like it was falling into place in terms of sourcing guests, coming up with names, finding the branding, getting quite a bit of following and excitement from really early on. And so it was easy for me to take that as a sign that I was on the right track. So I always kept having that motivation, which I was surprised about because I thought I might continuously try and talk myself out of it. So that was quite easy, was finding the motivation. What I found hard was editing and just like how much hidden work there is, how much hidden admin, how much time it takes to get a reel figured out, how much time it takes to edit out ums and ahs and likes and pauses and coughs. Like all of those things take so much more time than what you're expecting. And I think that's what I found hard was how much time it takes, especially if you want to do it well. Anyone can make a crap podcast, but if you want to make a good podcast, it takes time.
Yeah. And I love the phrase you use there, the hidden work, because I think that's really it, eh? When a lot of people are like, yes, I'm going to start a podcast. There is a lot more to it once you actually get down and dirty and get started. And it can be difficult to overcome, especially if you've got other commitments in your life. So how did you kind of find that internal motivation to keep going?
I think I always call it a passion project because I'm not making an income from it. It's not my primary job. And I think it's really good that it's a passion project at the moment, that there's no stress attached to me making money from it, because it means that I can be really particular with the product that it is. I'm not having to sort of bend to the will of other people or bend to the will of what people will like. Like I'm really protective over what it's going to be and what it looks like. And I think the internal motivation came from how much I was enjoying the conversations and the feedback that I was getting from people that were listening about how much they were resonating with the conversations as well. So I personally was just enjoying having these conversations. I always said, like, no one needs to listen. I'm just loving having these conversations. That's fulfilling enough in itself. But then there were people listening and they were enjoying it. And, you know, I've got this folder full of screenshots of these amazing messages from people who have listened. And anytime I feel a bit like crap or a bit stagnant or a bit unsure of myself, I just read through that folder and it keeps me going, because the way people have responded to the podcast and the way people have talked about it being quite like a space of connection or a space of like a friend in a dark, more lonely moment. It's like that's enough for me to just keep going every time I start to falter a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so important for overcoming that imposter syndrome as well, is like having some really nice positive feedback that you can go through and look at and really remind yourself and encourage yourself that actually, no, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm doing this because I love it, but also it's being received really well and other people are loving it too. I can do this. So
Yeah,
I love that you've got
totally.
that system going for yourself. That's absolutely amazing. And you have actually managed to grow a very like well engaged community through your podcast as well. Did you have any like intentional strategies around growing this?
Oh, I wish I had a good answer. I wish I could say, yes, this was my strategy and and these were my steps and this was my plan, but I really didn't. I think one of my strengths is that I am like a connection-based person. That's sort of like who I am in my job as a social worker, but also in my life. I sort of pride myself on my relationships and the way that I can connect with people. And I think one of the strengths in my job is that I can build rapport very quickly. But also I just love people. Like I'm a real people person. And so when there were people engaging with this project that I loved doing and responding to it, I was responding back. It wasn't like a hardship for me to be responding to comments or tagging people or following people and, just building that community. It started quite quickly. And obviously, like when you're making a parenting podcast, a lot of the people that are engaging with your work are mums on maternity leave. And so they are at home and they are on their phones. And so they're actually a really engaged audience because they're able to engage with your work a lot more, or you engage with your content a lot more than most audiences who have 9-to-5 jobs or, are sort of traditionally not able to be as online as mums are. So it's actually in terms of an engaged audience, if they like your content, they're really engaged naturally because they're sort of like looking for that connection whilst at home with a baby.
Now, you touched on your work as a social worker, being able to really inform a lot of the work that you do in your podcast. How have your skills as a social worker transferred over into your interviewing skills?
I mean, I think social work in whatever area you're in, there's a lot of sort of like assessment-based, interview-based work. Lots of like the way that I work, I'm based in a hospital and I'll be referred a patient and then I will go and meet with that patient. And often it's having to cover a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. And so I think I've honed that skill of being able to make people feel very comfortable with me very quickly. And in terms of like, often having to share quite vulnerably very quickly because I often work in the termination space. So that is like a very vulnerable space to work in and often involves people telling me very personal stories very quickly. And so I think that skill transferred quite well in terms of people are very happy to open up on the podcast in a way that I was even surprised people were happy with how vulnerable people were willing to talk on sort of like a public platform about their experience of parenting, their experience of being parented, like the hardships, the good stuff. But I do think that is a testament to practicing that skill so much in my career as a social worker. Yeah.
Have you got any sort of tips or advice on how people can build this rapport quickly if it doesn't like come naturally to them?
Yeah, I think put yourself in the perspective of the guest and think about how vulnerably you're asking them to share, and don't be afraid to offer up the same vulnerability. Because I think it's all about inherently already as an interviewer and an interviewee, one person has the power because one person's directing the conversation. And so you're finding ways to balance that relationship out so the interviewee feels safe to talk and safe to reveal things about themselves, especially if you're working in a space like parenting where there can be a lot of stuff that comes up. I think naturally when you're asking someone about their life and their experiences, stuff is going to come up. And so I think it's about being mindful of that inherent power balance that exists in a question and asking sort of format and balancing that out. And I think also like I don't know about you, but for me, when I listen to a podcast, I care as much about the host as I do about the guests. Like, I want to know about the host as well. And I've had feedback about that from audience as well, that they like when I'm sharing about my life too. And so I think figuring out where the balance is of offering up your own anecdotes and your own experiences to create that relatability, but also so that you're showing, hey, I'm sharing vulnerably in this space too. I'm not just asking you to do this alone. Really creating that like we're in this together kind of mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that perspective. I think, yeah, you're so right. Like, if you're asking someone to be vulnerable, you can't just come at it being like, right now, tell me all your deepest, darkest secrets. You know, you need to be able to be
Tell me what you
open.
love about being a parent. Tell me what you hate about being a parent. I'm going to show you nothing in return.
Exactly. I'm poker face all the way. So that's such great advice. And it's like when you say it like that and you joke about it like that, it seems like, well, obviously, but it's actually not that obvious, especially if you're not used to interviewing people. Maybe you don't feel so comfortable, and it can be really easy to just get into your, okay, I'm in the zone. And you're so internal that you're actually not necessarily listening to the conversation. You're not necessarily engaging. And that can make your guest feel really kind of stale as well.
Yeah. And I think something that is like a real quick way to kill a conversation, especially if you're a set questions kind of person, is to just ask the questions that you've got written down, because that just ends up being like, I will ask you a question, you will answer. I will move on to the next question. I think you need to be really open to the idea of tangents and being okay with letting the conversation just go where it's naturally going to go.
Yeah.
And then I think the art is in the edit at that point of what you're going to keep in and what you're going to take out.
100%. And Abby, I'm going to be completely honest. When I heard the concept of your podcast, that you had one set of questions, I was like, oh no, because of that. And I've heard other podcasts before where they just ask every guest the same questions and it's very question, answer, question, answer. I've also been a guest on that sort of podcast before. And as a guest, it just feels like, oh, okay, I just told you something very vulnerable and you are just moving on. Like it just seems 100%. Like they don't care.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, moving on. And you're like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm glad I shared that with you.
Exactly. And then when I actually listened to your podcast, I was like, oh, okay, no, hang on. So you've got your list of questions, but you're actually actively engaging in the conversation, you know? You're listening, you're involved. And so, yeah, it's really powerful and it's very clever as well, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just naturally because of my job, I'm used to having a sort of baseline of something that I'm following when I'm asking questions or in a conversation. Like as a social worker, you're always in a conversation for a purpose, whether that's information gathering or doing an assessment or whatever it is. Usually you're sort of working off some kind of structure. So I feel quite comfortable sitting in that kind of conversation when I'm meeting someone new, in terms of having a list of something or a goal of something or information that I'm trying to find out, but also knowing that the person in front of me is going to tell me whatever's sort of sitting at the top of their brain with them or whatever's hard for them, you know, like knowing that the conversation's going to be what it's going to be because that person is a unique person. And I think that's sort of why that structure felt so natural to me. But yeah, definitely aware that it wasn't exactly a recipe for success.
No, but you came into it though with that, like, I mean, you've got 5 questions, or secretly a 6th one as well.
6 questions.
And, you know, 5 questions is not enough to make up a whole hour of podcast, you know. So, you know, you came into it with this plan, and like you've obviously got a lot of experience in your work as a social worker as well to back this up. But like I don't think you can say it's not a recipe for success, because clearly for you it has been.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, my like podcast idol is Elizabeth Day from How to Fail. Like she's just in my head like the coolest woman in the whole entire world. I always say I want to be her when I grow up. And she, in her podcast, asks guests to bring 3 failures, like 3 life failures that they discuss. And I always think, like, if you're looking at that on paper, someone bringing 3 things that they've failed and talking about it, and that's all that they've got set for the podcast, and they often talk for an hour, that looks like it's going to be a really boring or weird conversation. But because Elizabeth brings so much vulnerability, she's an active listener, she's asking really pertinent and interesting questions that you're often thinking as a listener, that's what the secret sauce is. And I think it's quite like a similar thing of that it all sort of relies on how engaged I am, how present I am, and like how I'm asking questions, which no pressure.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you're doing a really great job at it, Abbey.
Thank you.
Now, you've had a few personal challenges, which you've been quite open about, including like mental health and the loss of a loved one. How do you keep consistent while you've got stuff going on in the background?
Yeah. I was lucky that I had managed to bank up a lot of records. So when it was my granddad passed away recently, and when he was already sick and we could sort of see the writing on the wall a little bit. So I did a bunch of records knowing that there was going to be a time coming up that I was probably not going to want to be actively engaging in really like energetic conversation with people, and that ended up being the case. So I was really lucky. I had about 6 or 7 records banked up, which saw me through to the end of season 1, which meant that I was able to have a break from the sort of person forward aspect of the job. And that really saved me, and I think has been a really good lesson for me in terms of banking records, and is something that I know that you talk about a lot too, of like, as much as you can, like have that sort of content prepared and ready to go. Yeah, that really saved me. And then in terms of like editing and reels and content and bits and pieces like that, I think I just knew that that needed to be done. So it was more of like a drag than it probably usually is, but it was a thing of like, if I want people, because I love every episode so much and each guest is new and I want everyone to hear this perspective that each guest is bringing, it's easy for me to be like, no, I need to do them their justice and sort of respect this guest by putting as much effort in, because I care so much about each story. So it is easy for me to, if I'm feeling a bit like, oh, I've got so much work to do, it's easy for me to kick myself out of that mindset, which is nice.
Yeah, totally. I totally understand that. And I think, yeah, like you say, batching your episodes so that you've got some up your sleeve for if something happens, even if, the kids are sick, you're sick or whatever, and you're like, oh no, I just really have to get this done. If you've got something up your sleeve, that can be really helpful. But in saying that, it doesn't work for every podcast and every format to do it. So if you can batch, it can be helpful, but then you also need to be willing to be agile on the fly as well, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I'm lucky. My husband actually did a Bachelor of Communications, and he majored in radio. He works in TV now, but he majored in radio. And when I first told him I wanted to start a podcast, that was one of his biggest pieces of advice, was like batch create content. So you've always got something ready to go. I think he just knew the nature of like life and busyness, that there would be times where I would need that sort of banked episodes ready to go. And he was right. He was proved right very quickly.
It can feel a little bit sometimes like you've started this content machine and now you're just constantly feeding it, especially if you're doing weekly episode drops. I think that's another reason that sometimes podcasts tend to fail, is people are like, yeah, I can talk about this. I'm passionate about it. I've got lots to say. And then they realize, oh, wait a minute, I've got to say something about this every single week, even if the kids are sick, even if I'm facing something in my personal life, even if I just am too tired and can't be bothered. I've still got to turn it out every week. My audience is there waiting. So, yeah, it is a... I like to have something up my sleeve all the time.
I think it's quite... I've had a lot of people messaging me recently asking about starting a podcast, and I really struggle to like verbalize or put into words how unrelenting a weekly release is. Like, I don't think you can understand until you're doing that turnaround each week actually how difficult that sort of time frame is, in terms of like record, edit, release, reels, record, edit, release. That's like a very unrelenting schedule. And so that is my advice to people starting a podcast, thinking about starting a podcast, is be really realistic with the amount of time you have and whether on like what your time frame's going to be.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be weekly. It just needs to be consistent.
Yes, someone's been watching my Instagram. That's what I say all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It just has to be consistent. You're exactly right. And it really depends on you, what you can take on, because if you're like, yeah, well, I'm on maternity leave at the moment and I've got time and I want to have a creative arm and I want to do something creative for myself, then maybe weekly is right for you. Whereas if you're working full time, maybe it's a project on the side, maybe you're thinking about fortnightly, maybe even monthly, and you can build and grow from there as your podcast builds and grows. But consistency is like, because your audience will be expecting, okay, well, every Wednesday morning on my way to work, I'm going to listen to Why Do You Parent Like That? And if it's not there, they're going to look for something else to listen to. So
exactly. And actually that is something for season 2, because for your listeners, I'm in a break right now. I'm having a month break. I've just finished season 1, which was 20 episodes of weekly releases. And now I'm heading into season 2 after a month, and I'm going to fortnightly releases for season 2 because I'm looking ahead. I go back to work in December and I know that realistically I'm not going to be able to commit to that weekly release schedule. So in order to stay consistent, I'm switching to fortnightly from season 2 onwards. So that has been a bit of a learning curve in terms of the amount of work and being realistic with going back to work, knowing that I'm going to be much more time poor than I am now. It was a hard decision to make, but I think in terms of that staying consistent, it was the necessary decision.
Totally. You're totally right. And, your audience, it will be a change for their expectations, but as long as you set those expectations and they come to know, okay, well, every fortnight I'm going to be listening to this at this time, like, as I say, it doesn't matter how often it is, as long as you set up those expectations with your audience and then are consistent with it. They'll be perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I think I was lucky in terms of that I had like built the audience already in that first season, and so when I felt like I was gentle parenting them almost a little bit. I was like, okay guys, there'll be a break and then I'm going to come back and it's going to be fortnightly. But everyone was like, I have a core sort of listener base that I'm in contact with a lot, and they were very kind and understanding and compassionate and like, you do you and we'll be here, and it was really lovely. So yeah.
And I think that's the thing about having your target audience as parents or mums as well, because they get it. They've got shit going on too, So yeah,
100%.
That's awesome.
Super understanding. Yeah. And I'm hoping like one day I'll be able to go back to weekly releases in the future. I can figure it out. But for now,
yeah, exactly. You do what you can in the moment. And, as time goes on, if you learn something new, if you've got more capacity, you can grow and change and let your podcast grow and evolve alongside you. Like, that's really the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Now, it seems like it's quite important for you to use your platform for good.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, in July you did the Gaza fundraiser, which was really awesome. You used your platform to encourage other creators to jump on board and raise money for Gaza. Were you ever worried about getting any backlash for that?
For about 3 seconds. Yeah. I thought, what might this mean? But I also, like a lot of things I do, I didn't think about it for too long. I just kind of went with it. I'm quite like an instinctive, like gut-led person in my personal life, but also it turns out in podcasting and social media as well. And I had already committed to giving my July earnings to Gaza and my July Substack, because I have a Substack as well. So my combined earnings from whatever podcast revenue I make, I'd committed to donating that to Gaza. And I was sitting there and I'd just read something about how someone had paid 450 New Zealand dollars for a bag of flour. And I knew my donation was going to be around $200. And I thought, my donation's only going to contribute to like half of a bag of flour for a family.
Wow.
And I'd been talking to a lot of creators about them not knowing how to talk about it, where to donate, if they felt like it was too late to jump on board. And so I just posted a story saying, here's what my donation's going to be. Does anyone want to match it? And lots of people asked if I could turn it into a reel so they could send it to their favorite creators. And so I did, and it just took off, like truly just took off. And I think our ending number's about $8,000.
Wow.
So it's just like all these amazing people managed to jump on board. And a lot of people messaged me saying it was really nice for them to sort of have that push and a space where they felt like, yeah, I can jump onto this. And yeah, it just ended up being like the right thing at the right moment. And it just all sort of like worked out really well. And yeah, it's just something I always knew that if I ended up having any kind of job or anything that had any kind of audience, that I'd want to be values led, because that's what I appreciate seeing in a content creator or in a creator in any way, in actresses and celebrities and whatever. I love when people are values first. And so I always knew I was going to be quite public with my opinions and my values and what I care about. And I think there's a bit of a responsibility if you have people watching you to use those eyes in whatever way you can. And for me, I'm not making much money. I am on maternity leave. Podcasting is not a lucrative game to start off with, and not for a long time. It's a really slow build. And so I thought, if I can't donate the money myself, maybe I can encourage other people to donate money too. Yeah.
It's
so
amazing.
that was my thoughts.
I love that. It's awesome.
Thank you.
And yeah, you got such an incredible response from that. $8,000 is nothing to scoff at. That's incredible.
Crazy. Yeah. It's just been amazing. And it was really like, it's just left a really hopeful feeling in my mouth. I think the sort of feeling has been quite bitter in terms of people's silence. And I think it was really beautiful to see so many people choosing to speak up and choosing to do good and choosing to like come together. It left me feeling very like, okay, all hope is not lost here. There are people who want to do good and want to try and want to contribute. They just don't know how. And so, yeah, that was like a really nice reframing for me as well.
So what advice would you have for other podcasters who also want to use their platform as a force for good?
Yeah, I think just be brave. And it's okay it's okay if people disagree with you, and you don't actually have to engage with the people that disagree with you. Like, they're probably not going to follow you. They're probably not going to listen to your podcast. You don't have to convince them. It's not, the onus isn't on you to convince them, but you just have your beliefs and be firm in them and know why you have them, be able to articulate them if you can. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be have a PhD on every topic that you're having a stance about. That's okay. Just stay firm in them and know that the people that are disagreeing with you probably aren't going to be listeners, probably aren't going to engage with your content. So do you need to spend time on them anyway? Like when I first posted about Gaza, people unfollowed me and I wasn't devastated. I was like, okay, that's all right. They're probably not going to be interested in my podcast either if we have such a big misalignment of values anyway. Yeah, so I think just be brave.
Yeah, for sure. You're so right. I think the thing with podcasts is that it's very niche. And in that, I mean, like, you're very specific about what your podcast is, who you are, who you're talking to, like what your angle is, but then also what kind of audience you attract. And if people are going to be offended by something, or if people don't align with those values, then they're just not the right audience for you,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If they move on, great, move on. Hope you find something that you align with, and you've got your village here and your community here as well.
Yeah, and I think probably like it felt easier because I already had an established audience, and so many of them were responding saying, this is amazing, I'm so glad you're talking about, I was getting, for every unfollow, I was getting 10 messages saying this is awesome. And I actually gained heaps of followers and my listenership jumped on July. And I think it's I was lucky in that the first sort of controversial thing I spoke about, I had an overwhelmingly positive response to, with a few negatives. It would probably be different if I'd had an overwhelmingly negative response. But I think I'm at the space now that if I had an overwhelmingly negative response from my audience, I would be stepping back and examining what was going on with me, because I'm so aligned with my audience that I feel like there probably would be me doing something wrong, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it would be a thing where I reflected on myself and what my beliefs were at that point.
I think that's a really great attitude to have about it as well, because, you know, I said before, and as I was saying it, I was like, hang on a second. I said if something is going to offend someone, then it's not for them. But if you are offending the majority of your audience, maybe you need to have a little look at
100%.
yourself. And, you know, yeah. So you recently got picked up by iHeartRadio. Will you tell me a little bit about how that process happened?
Yeah, it was sort of crazy. I think they're always on the lookout for podcasts, iHeart. They're very switched on people, and they're always looking at bringing new people and new podcasts that they believe in onto the network. I had asked Ben Boyce to be on the podcast of Jono and Ben fame, but he also is on The Hits. So he's technically under iHeartRadio, and he has a podcast with his daughter under iHeartRadio. But basically, any time that someone who's under NZME, any NZME talent wants to be on a podcast, they need to let iHeart know, because obviously they don't want them going on a competitor, or, you know, there's lots of reasons why iHeart would like to know. So he forwarded, I have a podcast outline that I send to every potential guest to read through so they can get an idea of what the podcast is, what the kaupapa is, who I am, why I feel like I should have a podcast, why I'm qualified to have a podcast, you know, all those sorts of bits and pieces. I'd sent that to Ben, and so he'd forwarded it on to iHeart to say, hey, just letting you know, I'm keen to be on this podcast, just getting the all clear. And then iHeart read the outline and liked the look of it and listened to a couple of episodes and liked it. And so just emailed me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming in for a meeting? And I was like, oh my gosh, I was terrified, because in my head, I was planning on building the podcast for a year and then starting to kind of like shop it out to networks, because I knew once I went back to work, I'd want to be working with a network in order to start to outsource stuff and to help with admin and all that jazz. And so this, for context, was about 8 weeks after I'd started. And so they sent me an email. I panicked for a weekend. That was on a Thursday. We'd organised the meeting for the Monday. I panicked. I got all my stuff in order, went and bound a little book with all my outline and guest list and dreams and hopes for the future and my current listenership and all that jazz, and brought it in with me. And yeah, just met with a lovely lady named Phoebe, and we just chatted about what we wanted the podcast to look like, what it would look like to come on board with iHeart, and they very much left the ball in my court, which was amazing. I sort of went in thinking I was pitching myself, and went into the meeting and they were like, no, we want you. And I was like, oh my gosh. So that was awesome. And I told myself that there were a few things that I wouldn't compromise on, but they never asked me to compromise on those things. So owning the IP and bits and pieces like that I was very strict about. But that was never even a question. And yeah, signed with them the next day. So they messaged me on the Thursday, and by Tuesday I was signed with them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Has anything changed for you in terms of your process or how you approach your podcast since you signed with them?
Not really. The thing that I was worried about with signing with someone like iHeart is that they would try and have any kind of creative control, because I have a very particular vision of what I want this podcast to look like. And so I was worried that by signing with someone like NZME, they would say that I couldn't have any talent from their competitors' networks and bits and pieces like that. But they have never said that. They've never wanted to have any control, or I've never had to run anything by them. I do, out of courtesy, if I think something's interesting to them, or when I'm coming on other podcasts, I'll flick them a message saying, hey, I'm going to be on this podcast, just to let them know. The only thing that's really changed is if I have a question, I now have a team of people I can message and ask about it, which is so nice. Yeah, it is. It's I, as a social worker, or just as who I am as a person, being a people person, I love working in a team, and podcasting is quite a lonely game sometimes. And so having a team of people who are, there's a social media team, there's the promotions team, there's all these people who can help me if I have questions about I'm about to run my first event, and so getting their insight on that, or pitching articles. I've just had an article published in the spin-off, so I could ask advice about how I go about pitching articles, and bits and pieces like that is just so helpful, having people who know the game really well.
Do you have any advice for any other independent podcasters who are looking to get picked up by a network like iHeart?
I mean, I wish I did because it came randomly to me,
Yeah.
but I think don't be over prepared. I think treat it like a professional, treat it like a job interview, put your best foot forward. And I think the thing that for me made the difference for them was that I had this outline already for potential guests. All it took was an email forward for them to see everything about my podcast, about who I am, about what the podcast is, about what the vibe is, the goals of the podcast. I had that already from the outset going to each guest. And I think that meant when it sort of fell across the desk of iHeart, they could get a really good idea of who I was and what the vision was, and they could see where it was filling the gap. And I'd outlined that I thought it was filling the gap in the outline. So believe in your podcast, believe in your product.
Yeah.
But I also think networks are always looking for new talent. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. If you believe in your product and you think that it's filling a gap on a network, send it to them. Why not? Send them a pitch. What have you got to lose by sending a pitch?
Yeah. I fully agree. And I think, as you say, it is important to really have done all of that background work on who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, who your audience is, why you fill a gap, why your podcast is important. Because even if you've done all of this work just in terms of yourself, for yourself and for your own content and your own reference, you can then use it in so many different ways, like for
100%.
guest pitches, for network pitches, for sponsor pitches.
Sponsorship, yeah.
Now, talking about sponsorships, you had some sponsorship deals from quite early on. How did you go about getting your first sponsor?
Sent a bunch of cold emails. No, I did do a lot of that in that sort of week before I had launched the Instagram. In that week where I was like, I'm going to do a podcast. Okay, launch the Instagram. Here we go. We're building excitement. I also created a pitch for guests. So a guest outline, sponsorship pitch, and something else as well. But basically, I created a lot of templates where I was really mindful with the language. I was really clear about who I was. But it just meant that doing all of that, and it was a lot of work. And I think that's part of the work that people don't realize how much work that is. It was a lot of work. I was able to send through sponsorship pitch decks basically to a bunch of places that I really believed in. I think the reason that, because it was Bear and Moo, the beautiful Bear and Moo, who came on board with me for the first 5 episodes, I think the reason that they came on board was because I was really open with the fact that they are a favorite brand of mine. I only really approached brands that I had worked with before, or that I liked their product, basically. Products that I believed in, that I had used, that I thought I wouldn't be afraid to go on my podcast and stand by, because I'm never going to be that podcaster that gets online and it's like, I use blah, blah, blah every day when I've never used them before. And so I was able to approach brands that I could genuinely say, I've used this and I love it, and it's something that I use every day, and I think that we really align, and our demographics are basically a circle, they're a Venn diagram circle over each other. And I think that made the difference of me being able to be like, actually, I love your guys' stuff, and that's why I'm approaching you with this. Yeah, so Bear and Moo were like that. Viva La Vulva were like that. There were a few brands that I was like, I genuinely believe in your products and genuinely think that there's a really great natural collaboration here, and they jumped on board with that. Yeah,
that's the other thing as well, and that's the other part or aspect that it's important to be quite values led in. And I know you've spoken before when you signed with iHeartRadio that there were some sponsorship or ads around gambling or alcohol, and you told them a firm no, because this does not align with my audience. And it is really important to be values led with this, because not only is it going to be most effective for the brand, that if your audience trusts you to be bringing them sponsorship and products that you have used and you can genuinely recommend, that's going to be more effective for the sponsor in the end as well. So it's really bringing all of that together.
Yeah, and like I have turned down a lot of sponsorship, maybe to my detriment, definitely to the detriment of my bank account, but there were just sponsors that I think I'm just very aware that mums and new parents are an audience that are sort of like shilled products constantly and are told like you need this product to, you know, make your baby stop crying or whatever. And I just completely disagree with that. I think it's so predatory, and so I'm very protective of my audience. Basically, I feel very protective of them, and I'm never going to let my podcast become a platform for someone to shill a product that I don't believe in, or I'm never going to let it become a space that just turns into an hour-long advert for a product. Or, you know, I'm just like really protective of the podcast as a product, but also of the audience as a listenership. And so that's always been like something that I really care about, and was actually one of my sort of like deal breakers with iHeart if I couldn't have some say over what was being advertised. Because if you don't know how networks work for listenership, if you don't know how it works, basically iHeart have like a log of ads that they just kind of insert into every podcast under their network, and it's often not really like super personalized to the podcast itself. They don't go through and put it into each individual podcast, but you can have a list of things where you say, no, I don't want that being advertised on my podcast. And so for me, knowing that I had new parents following me, and as a social worker seeing sort of the effects that certain ads can have on people, I said a firm no to gambling, a firm no to alcohol, and a firm no to any kind of weight loss products, supplements, dietary, anything like that. Yeah, those were my three that I was very firm on. And iHeart were amazing about it. They were like, yeah, we absolutely understand. And of course, you know, they never put up a fight about that.
Good. Love that. So how did you decide, pre-iHeart, how did you decide on your like sponsorship pricing and packaging?
Oh my gosh, that was so hard. I made it really low to start off with because I was emailing people before I'd even launched. So I couldn't even say, I have this many listeners. I had 0 listeners because I hadn't launched yet. So I knew that sponsorship would beget sponsorship. So I knew that I just needed to get some sponsors on board. And once I had some sponsors on board, then it would be able to say to future sponsors, here's what it looks like when I have sponsorship. Here's what an ad read sounds like. Here's the pricing. And I knew I could gradually increase that over time. So for me, the priority was like finding sponsors and agreeing to whatever they wanted to agree to, and knowing that I could work towards whatever I wanted my pricing to be eventually. But I did talk to my friend Nick Halderzos, who has like a kind of content creator marketing agency. He sort of like helps content creators find sponsorship and works with creative ideas with them. Him and his partner Cassidy do that. And so I spoke to him and said, what should I pitch it at? And I sent him my outline, and he was like, you are really undervaluing yourself here. So I sort of upped my prices when he saw it. But yeah, I really started so low, like I can't even remember. I can look back and find it. But I think my first sponsorship pitch deck said something about like $100, even if that, for and 3 ad reads throughout the episode, which for anyone in the industry, that is very low. But I had no listeners. So, you know, I kind of like had nothing to stand on with it. I just knew that if I wanted to get future sponsors, I needed to show them what it looked like when I was being sponsored and why that would be worth their while.
Yeah. So what's the biggest thing that podcasting has taught you?
Oh my gosh. I think probably self-belief and self-confidence, like faking it till I make it. A lot of just having to go with my gut and stand on my 10 toes about what I believe in and what direction I think I should go in. And I think like having my vision in my head and sticking to that, but also being open to others' ideas. I think it's like the first thing I've ever done that's a really, really solo project. It's sort of been me from start to finish, and usually I'm quite like a collaborator. So as much as people have helped me or given me advice, or, I have guests every week. So it's the actual podcast itself is a very relational based podcast, but every decision that's been made around it has been me by myself. And so I think it's been a lot of trusting myself. And sometimes I don't even know the reason why I'm making a decision. I just know that that's the decision that feels right. And so far for me, that's all paid off in dividends, so I think it's just been a lot of because this product is so me reflected, trusting that whatever decision I'm making is the right one.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to someone thinking about starting a podcast?
I think there are lots of podcasts in the world. Make sure yours is going to be a good one. Yeah. I think it's very easy to, like I say, it's really easy to have a bad podcast and it's really easy to have a boring podcast. It's hard to have a good podcast. Make sure yours is going to be a good one and that it's actually worth all the work you're going to put into it.
What is a good one?
I think a good one, remembering that it's entertainment for starters. All podcasts are entertaining. All podcasts are connection. And I talk about this a lot, but I know that creators and influencers are getting told to start podcasts because it can be a really good revenue stream. And that grinds my gears a little bit because I think that's going to lead to a lot of podcasts being made that are just filled with ums and ahs and rambly stories and waffle and nothing that's sort of any importance or value. I'm just podcasting is such an incredible platform or an incredible medium in terms of it being a space for long form content in a time where short form content is king. So I think the fact that you have people's attention for however long you've got it for, for me it's an hour at a time. I want that hour to be valued and respected and to actually provide something of worth for them. I would hate to think that I wasn't putting 100% of my effort or, working really hard to make sure that I'm respecting their time by providing them with a really great product.
I love that so much. You put that so perfectly. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Abbey. That has been such a valuable episode, and I'm sure many aspiring podcasters will have gained a few tips.
Hope so. Feel free to message me, aspiring podcasts. I can help you out, but also listen to this podcast because this is Maxine's been just the best and helpful and answered many a tricky question for me. So very grateful for you as well.
Thanks, Abbey. If you do want to follow Abbey on Instagram, she's doing amazing stuff and her podcast is definitely going places. Why do you parent like that on Instagram? Or do you have any other ways that people can get in touch with you?
I have a TikTok as well. It's not as exciting. We're building over there. But also my email account is whydoyouparentlikeThat@gmail.com. So I'm always open to an email.
Awesome. Thanks again, Abbey. And if you loved this episode, make sure that you hit that follow button and leave a quick review because it really helps small creators like you find the show. Until next time, keep creating, keep connecting, and keep podcasting. Thanks for listening to Want a Podcast. If you got something out of this episode, give it some love. Subscribe, follow, share it with your friends, or leave a review. It all helps to get this podcast into the ears of those who need it. If you're keen to connect, check out Want a Podcast or Maxine London Creative on Instagram, or head to maxineLondonCreative.co.nz. Check out the show notes for links. Thanks again for being part of my community. See you next time.